Hello everyone, it's great to have you with us today for our webinar on moving to France and buying a French property. My name's Karen Tate, I'll be your host for the next hour. I'm a freelance journalist in the UK. For the past 20 or so years, I've been editing French Property News magazine, and I also contribute to titles such as the Sunday Times. I'm joined as usual by our panel of experts who are all ready and waiting to answer your questions. Thanks to those of you who've already sent in questions. If you have any during the webinar, there's a box to the right of your screen. So before we get on to those questions, I'll hand over to our panelists to each introduce themselves and say hello. So Lisa.
Hello, hi everyone. Yes, I've been working with Leggett Immobilier for around 20 years as an agent and then a regional coach looking after teams of agents, and I'm currently looking after the contracts team at the Leggett head office, which looks after mandates when people put a property for sale, and contracts when a sale is actually organised, and the whole follow-up on that. So, yeah.
Thanks, Lisa. And Tracy?
Hi everybody, my name is Tracy Leonetti. I'm a relocation expert. I've been based in the south of France now for 35 years. I'm originally from England, from Yorkshire, and I created my business 15 years ago to help people who are moving, living or creating a business in France, to help people with their paperwork. So really we're about helping you getting from finding your dream home once you've found it, to help you with the paperwork behind that. So that would be visas or healthcare affiliation, driving licenses, creating your business and managing it. And our job is to help you step by step integrate into the French system.
That's great. Thanks, Tracy. And Sharon?
Hi everybody, I'm Sharon Revolt. I'm a French mortgage broker and I look after the international team at CAFI. I've been working and arranging French mortgages now for the last 23 years for non-resident and expat customers, and we can help guide you based on where you live, what your financial situation is, your employment situation, to help make your dream of owning a property in France come true.
Thanks, Sharon. And Helen?
Hi, I'm Helen Harrop. I work for both Agence AXA International and also our broker aspect, which is L'Onomy, and I specialise in health insurance. I've lived in France for 13 years now, and I help accompany people with their health insurance from kind of start to finish.
That's great. Thanks, Helen. And Amanda?
Hi everybody, my name is Amanda Johnson. I work for the Spectrum IFA Group, and we are a firm of fully regulated financial advisors here in France. We specialise really in making sure that when you move to France, everything that you have here or you've already got is properly tax efficient and tax compliant. And I celebrated 20 years being in France 2 days ago, so it's all very exciting for me, and I've been with Spectrum for 17 years, so I'm looking forward to the webinar and all your questions.
Yeah, congratulations on that, Amanda. And over to Harry.
So hello everyone, thanks for having me. So my name's Harry Burtis. I'm joining you today to represent Lumon. I've been working at Lumon for 3 years, based in London, but originally I'm from France, so I grew up down in the south, so I do know a little bit of what it's like to be a foreigner in France. So Lumon, who are we? Well, we are here to provide faster, more secure and cost-effective solutions for international transfers, especially relating to property transactions. So we've been helping clients move to and from France for over 25 years. And last year we transacted just over £7 billion of currency. So I'm a bit of a francophile. I love the country, love the language and everything it has to offer. But I'm also really interested in the FX markets and the exchange rates and how these vary based on events that are happening in the world. So one thing I like to do in these webinars is to find out just a little bit more about you, our audience. So I'm going to share a poll with you now, which should appear on your screens. And the first question just relates to when you're planning on starting to look at properties in France. This is a really useful piece of information for us to understand because as you might be aware, when you're buying a property in France, it's not an overnight process. But the good news is that we're here to help you to use this time so that you can plan your transfer, and you know, offer you a wide array of options to choose from. Timing and planning are both key when you're gearing up to make a large international payment. So it's a really important piece of information. So thanks to everyone. I can see the answers coming in now. I'm just going to go straight to the next question. So 1 second. Second question is appearing now. The second one relates more to when you're financially going to be in a position to make the offer. This is an important point, especially when you're looking at it from a foreign currency exchange perspective. And we're concerned by this just due to the simple fact that rates, they're changing every single day, every single week. And we're here to sort of assist, as I mentioned earlier, by helping you mitigate some of that risk. You might want to lock in the rate earlier. You might already have the money to go. So these are pieces of information which can help us offer the best solution. Once you've done a simple registration with us, basically, you'll be speaking to one of the senior traders in our team, and they'll be running you through all of these different options. And finally, I'll move on to the last question for tonight, which is going to appear on your screen now. So we're interested to find out where you're joining us from today. It doesn't really have a huge impact when it comes to the French buying process, but there are some slight differences, which is why we're interested, just to make sure that we're prepared, so that there's no surprises, and make sure everything runs smoothly when the time comes. So thanks to everyone who's answered the questions. That's really useful information, and I'll hand back to Karen now.
Thanks, Harry. So the questions, we've had a fun question come in for Lisa from Kathleen Morrison in Ireland. She wants to buy a property in France, and she says she loves the beach, rugby and fashion, which is an interesting combination. Any suggestions of locations she should be considering?
Well, I live in Brittany, which is obviously very well served with beaches, but we're not well served with rugby. So I think it really needs to be the southwest. Fashion suggests that you might want to be in a city, or if you're on the Mediterranean coast, if you have the budget for it, then you'll find rugby and beaches and fashionable people. So that southwest southern area, possibly if you go a bit more inland, again down to budget, Perpignan has lots of history, and you'd also get some access to skiing there in the winter as well, if you like that also, as well as the beaches in the summer. Along the Med, maybe Toulon, that's quite appealing for the rugby side. Bordeaux, obviously a city, very dynamic, fashionable city, lots going on, and not so very far from beaches. People's tolerance on the distance to a beach really depends and is driven by budget, because if you live somewhere really landlocked at the moment, then you might find an hour or 2 hours to the beach is not bad. Some people, when they say they want to be close to the sea, they mean pied dans l'eau. They really want to be absolutely at the coast, but again, budget will dictate what you can do in regard to that. Brive in the Dordogne is quite a strong rugby area, so lots of options for that. But with any property search, the best thing to do is obviously to get connected with an agent. You know, we use the strap line, local knowledge you can trust, and it's not for no reason. Our agents really know their areas. And if you can be willing to share with them and work with them and connect with them, then they will guide you and help to target the search. So hopefully that helps on that one.
Sorry, I was muted. I was just saying thank you, Lisa. That's great. I'm a rugby fan myself, so I think it would have to be the southwest, but I'm not sure how the fashion comes into that. But as you said, Bordeaux would be a great suggestion. Yeah,
I'm not sure if maybe Harry knows more about rugby than me as well, to be fair. Maybe growing up in the south of France.
Yeah, further west of where I was, maybe around Toulon and places like that are pretty good for rugby.
Yeah.
I'm not really an expert when it comes to rugby, so I can't provide too much more info, sorry.
But
Absolutely.
absolutely budget. When you say you want to be near beaches, it's all about budget as to how far away from the beaches you are. In Brittany, for example, which I've already said is not great for rugby, and it's not overly fashionable either, to be fair, most of it, unless you go to Rennes. If you want to be half an hour from the coast, then you've got lots and lots of affordable properties. But if you get much closer, it's obviously much more pricey. And that's going to be replicated across the whole country. The closer you are, the more it's going to cost. So establish your budget to start with.
Yeah, I think as with many aspects of buying a property in France, you have to sort of look at your priorities. And if it's fashion, rugby and beaches, you probably have to decide an order, Kathleen, I would say. But that's great advice from Lisa. Let's move on to one for Tracy now. Stuart Ritchie in the UK wants to know about visa requirements to be able to buy and run an existing business. And Coralie Knott in Canada says she's looking to purchase a business. What visa can I apply for? I will be creating jobs and tourism. And I don't know if that last bit would make any difference.
Okay, interesting questions. So visa requirements basically for businesses, be that creating a business or buying an existing business. There are a few options, and it will depend largely on the size of business. And of course, that can vary largely. And that's something that I tend to go through with my clients at the beginning when they have a project of this size, is to really discuss, okay, what is the business project? What is the size of the business, how much you invest in, how much you're going to earn from it, because that will determine the type of visa. But for this purpose this evening, I think what I will give you is a couple of options. The one option for small to medium-sized business will be the long stay entrepreneur liberal visa, which I've spoken about in previous webinars and also my Ask Me Anything webinars. It's basically a like I say, small to medium, so it's also valid for consultants who are transferring skills, but also if you buy in an existing business that may be a small kind of Airbnb or kind of hospitality business, but a small one, you could go for the liberal visa. Obviously that could be a creation or existing as well. You obviously have to certain key requirements, but it has to be, actively managed, and it has to generate income in France. You have to have, for example, a really credible business and financial plan. You have to show that you have the relevant skills and experience and the financial means, of course, which may be investing a certain amount of money in that, and show that you can earn from it a minimum wage, the SMIC level. So that would be the liberal visa. As a second option, and I was thinking about the second part of the question, I think I had tourism and creating jobs and things, might be a more of a higher level type of business. There's also what's called a passport talent, excuse me, kind of business investor type visa. So this one is really good when you're kind of a more larger scale investment. So let's say you're going to invest 300,000 euros in a project in France. Again, it could be a creation or taking over an existing business where you will be creating jobs, creating, maybe it's tourism. So you would invest in a company or buy a new one. You would invest, obviously the 300,000 would be part of the portfolio that you buy in. Both projects have obviously criteria. You have to show the proof of economic contribution in the business visa one. They will focus heavily on the business plan and financial projections. You have to show how you're going to make a salary. And of course, I would advise you to align your business plan with the type of business structure. And if you're talking the high-end type of business, you're talking a type of SAL or SAS type activity. If you're talking a liberal visa, called a small to medium, you're talking more like a micro-entreprise or entreprise individuelle or rien. But of course, I know that's a lot of information, might be a bit too technical, but of course, reach out to me if you need some help with any of those projects. Sorry.
Thanks, Tracy.
It's a bit technical, I know.
So now we have a question for Amanda from Valerie Toomey in the US. She wants to know if there are any tax issues with dual citizenship.
Okay, so firstly, no, there isn't. There's a little bit more paperwork for yourself. You mentioned that you're US. So US, you are taxed on your citizenship. Okay, so you'll have to do a tax return for the US. And in France, you're taxed on your residency, so you'll have to do another tax return here. And advice would always be to get a professional to do those for you. And there are some professionals that will actually do both returns for you, so that's probably a good idea. There is a US-France tax treaty, so you're not going to be paying taxes twice, which we all like to hear. Nobody wants to pay it twice. It does get a little bit more, I'm going to say complicated or nuanced, whichever word you want to use, when it comes to investments. Okay, because things that may well be tax efficient in France don't work for the US, and stuff that you might have in France doesn't work here. So that's where you'd speak to somebody like myself to look on a case by case and how we can get you paying the least amount of taxes as possible. But back to the original question, no, there shouldn't be any issues apart from extra paperwork for yourself.
Thanks, Amanda. So the question now for Sharon from Ben Walker in the US. He's interested in mortgage availability for Americans in France and what the norms are for down payment, etc.
Okay, thank you, Ben, for your question. Mortgages are available for Americans purchasing in France. However, some banks will say that they won't lend because you're a US person and US resident, and the red tape will mean that they find it very difficult to do the required reporting. So sometimes people come to us and say, oh, well, we've been told we can't get a mortgage as an American resident. It's not the case with all French banks or all French lenders. So we do work with some lenders that are able to assist. There are two differences in terms of lenders. It would be whether you're an American resident or whether you're living elsewhere and you're just an American, a US person. In both cases, we can assist, and deposits required typically range between 25 and 30% of the property purchase price, excluding purchase costs. It does depend on your personal situation and where you are buying, as well as the property you are buying. In some cases, we can go higher in terms of loan to value, possibly even as much up to 85%, and sometimes 100% mortgages. But when we do 100% mortgage, we will actually then be putting the equivalent of your deposit, your down payment, so the 20 or 30%, in an account with a French bank. But it enables you to leverage maximum against the property, and therefore French interest rates are quite a lot lower than in the US, from what our clients tell us. So generally you'll be between about 3.6 and 4.4% on a fixed interest rate here. So it is possible. It does depend on your situation, but generally you should be looking between about 25 and 30% plus the purchase costs.
Thanks, Sharon. So we've got a healthcare question that's come in for Helen. It's what are the health insurance requirements for a long stay visa, and does travel insurance work?
Thank you. Thanks, Karen, for the question. That's a really kind of good one, I think, for most people as they're planning ahead. Health insurance requirements for a visa are fairly straightforward. If you're coming for a visitor visa, there are some visas where you won't necessarily be asked for a private insurance, although I would still recommend you have something in place that's slightly different, because there is going to be a period. So I think like the visas that Tracy was talking about earlier, such as the auto entrepreneur, the passport talent, you don't necessarily need to present a health insurance policy for the visa application, but you just need to think about yourself and you will need something in place while you get settled and get everything registered. For the visa, generally we're looking here at the long stay visitor visa, where you do need to present a private insurance, and the requirements are you need to have a minimum of 30,000 euros worth of cover. It needs to be valid for the full 365 days of the stay, and it must include repatriation. There's a few other minor issues with there, but that's generally the kind of fundamental rules you need to follow. And there are similarities with travel insurance, which is why I do find people often feel they can use their travel insurance, particularly if it's an annual policy. The issue there is that a travel insurance will generally cover you for trips, say of up to 3 months at a time within that year of cover. The insurance you present for the visa must be valid continuously for the full 365 days of that first year, and that really is the kind of main thing. After that, there's quite a range of policies available with different levels of cover, and it's definitely worth speaking to a specialist just to see kind of how comprehensive you need to have it or how basic you can get away with, depending on your situation.
Lovely, thanks for that, Helen. So we've got a currency question now for Harry. What is the benefit of using a currency company over a high street bank, and do you charge a fee?
Okay, yeah, I like this question because lots of clients are actually unaware of an alternative like us when they're doing international payments. So to answer it, I think there's two main benefits of using us over using the high street bank. And they are the service that we can provide, and the exchange rate. So once we've understood your timeline, we're going to be working with you so that you can maximize the amount of euros you're going to see on the other side, so in France. When you go to the bank, you're not necessarily being offered a very good rate, so we're going to be able to offer you a much more competitive rate, but more importantly, we're going to speak to you and look at how the rate is fluctuating, if there's any big important decisions that are being made by the government that might cause volatility, and keeping you informed as much or as little as you would like. Some clients want to speak to us every single week for a bit of an insight into the markets. Others prefer to get the news via the weekly email that we send out with a bit of a market update, which is a bit more general. It's not tailored to everyone's sort of scenario. And others prefer to not look at it at all, which is a bit risky, but especially if their budget's going to be stretched to start off with, it's a bit risky to not look at the exchange rates at all. So in terms of service, what I mean by that is that you're going to be connected to one of the members in the team of the senior traders. Once you've agreed to register, you'll be put in contact with them, and you'll have a free and no obligation account with us. In this team, we've got 15 traders. Most of them have been working with us for 10, some 20, some over 20 years, and they're going to be able to answer your questions with the, all around the finer details regarding timing, and they'll also be here to make sure that everything's sorted in terms of compliance and paperwork with the banks prior to the transfer leaving your Lumon account. They'll also be on hand to help if there's any abnormalities that come up. But then you asking, do we charge a fee? I think that's a good thing to address. So we don't charge a fee as such. What we do is we work off the interbank rate, as does every single currency provider out there. And we basically negotiate with the bank the best rate to get it as close to this interbank level as possible. So this is where we're going to be saving you money versus the bank. So we're going to get you much closer to the interbank rate. And on top of that, we're not charging you a fee. So other providers, not only are they charging you that fee just to do the transaction, but then they might be giving you a poor exchange rate as well. So that can end up being quite a bit of money when it gets to the other side.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Harry. So now we have a couple of buying questions about the buying process for Lisa. Stephen Pika in the USA says, could you describe the legal process and expenses for a purchase? And Nicholas Woodall says, how long is the time between making an accepted offer to getting the key?
Right, okay. Well, from making the accepted offer, the next step is to sign a pre-contract, either a compromis de vente or a promesse, prepared either by Leggett Immobilier in our case, which can be a bilingual compromis, or if it's prepared by the notaire, it could be a compromis or a promesse. But that's an initial document which will have annexed to it and included within it a huge amount of information about the vendors, the buyers, and the property. Now, the whole process is very transparent and extremely secure. So within that contract, as I say, it will have all of the information relating to the property, the diagnostic reports, so the state of the electricity installation, if there's any lead in the property, parasite reports, etc. They will all be annexed to the compromis, as will information about any servitudes or rights of way, or any special arrangements relating to the property. Every single thing will be detailed within there, including a description of the property, and the cadastral references, which is, for anyone from the UK, it's like the land registry. It shows exactly what parcels of land the property is standing on and are included. And all of the pricing information, which will include the costs. So the pricing information is obviously the cost of the property. Any inventory which is included will be detailed and the price will be shown. And the agency fees will be broken down, and then the other cost, the notaire fees as they're referred to, which obviously includes what is paid to the notaire for the work that he or she is doing, but also all of the taxes that they're collecting, because they are collecting taxes for local governments, etc. And that's all detailed in the compromis. So the final amount which is detailed in there and which you sign will be the amount you pay. You won't suddenly get any requests to pay some additional sum. And in fact, in almost all cases, buyers receive a very small amount back from the notaire after a few months, because it's been overestimated into the contract to make sure that there is no shortfall. So the whole thing is thoroughly transparent, thoroughly detailed, and you sign that contract, the vendors sign that contract, and the buyers then benefit from a 10-day cooling off period. So they can say, oh yes, okay, we want to proceed, or oh no, want to pull out. So you've got that extra period of reflection there after you've signed it and had all of the chance to look at all of the information. At the end of the cooling off period, if there is a deposit involved in your purchase, you need to have paid the deposit to the notaire, and the whole contract becomes binding. If you have applied for a mortgage, or you have some other clause suspensive, a clause by which it needs to be fulfilled or the whole thing doesn't proceed, that can be successfully obtaining a mortgage, or it can be because there's a chain, you're selling a property somewhere else and that's been worked into the contract, or some other very black and white pre-agreed thing that you must obtain planning permission for a specific project, etc. It has to be something which the vendor agrees to allow you, and something which can be clearly defined as having been fulfilled or not fulfilled. It can't be a subjective thing. So all of that happens, and once the contract is called off and the deposit is in, if it's relevant, it's all passed to the notaire, and the notaire does all of the searches on the property and preparing for the final act. We keep in touch with you during that process. We'll help you to sort out things like insurance for the property and so on. And clearly at the point of acquisition, you will need to have electricity contracts, water contracts, and insurance, phone services if you wanted them. So those are normal costs, but there are no hidden costs along the way. And the whole of that process almost always takes around 3 months. Occasionally it can be faster for some specific reasons, but it's almost always about 3 months, or perhaps a little longer. But by mutual agreement, it can be fixed with a longer end date. So if somebody, for some particular reason, doesn't want to acquire the property for 6 months or 9 months, and the vendor is in agreement, that can be worked into the contract. So I think that was all of the question. But
That was very, very well answered. Thank you, Lisa. Very comprehensive. Okay, then let's move on to one for Tracy. William Hill in the US says, we moved out of France. My wife's resident visa has since expired. She is British. How difficult would it be to obtain another? So I guess, do they have to start from scratch, or does it make a difference that she already had a visa?
Really good question, William. So effectively, if your wife's visa has expired and you're in France, then of course she has to leave. If you haven't renewed it in France, you have to leave and go back to the US. I imagine that's where you're living. It doesn't stop her reapplying, but unfortunately, yes, she would have to start from scratch. I'm not quite sure which visa she has. I'm assuming it's a long stay visitors visa, for example. So what would happen is she would have to start again, going through the visa process back from country of origin or country of residence, in this case, the US, even if she's British. Because unfortunately, it depends how long it's expired. Now, we do have people who come to France on their visas and forget to renew. And if you're watching this and want, please do reach out. If you forget to renew, normally you're supposed to renew your visa 4 months before expiry. And the reason it's 4 months is because it takes a long time to renew and get your residency card. So 4 months beforehand. But if, for example, you forget or there's a problem and for some reason you haven't been able to do that, you can apply to renew after the deadline, even if it's expired. But I wouldn't push it for too long. We had situations with help clients, it's been expired for 8 months, we managed to get it through, but I wouldn't advise anybody listening to this to try and renew a visa that's been expired for 8 months. If it has expired a few months, you can still go renew. You'll pay a penalty, of course, for that renewal because it's late. But if it's a really long time, then you need to go back to the US, start again, apply via the online France visa website, go to the TLS office, and then of course come across again and start from scratch. So sorry, I don't have any major miracle for you, but again, if it's recently expired, you can try and renew online via the ANF site. If it's really, really old and you haven't done it because for whatever reason, then you need to go back and start again. But it shouldn't be any more difficult than the first time round. It's not because you have let it expire and you've had to go back, but it'll be any more complicated than the first time round.
Thanks, Tracy. Thank you. A UK pensions question now for Amanda. How is the lump sum from pensions taxed in France, especially if people are taking the 25% tax-free each month from the UK?
Okay, that is quite a good question because it's one I've been asked quite a lot at the moment. So when you get to an age where you can take your UK pension, not your state pension, this is either a personal pension or a company pension, you can choose whether you take a 25% commencement lump sum, which in the UK is tax-free. You can either take that in one go, or you can elect to have it each month. So, you know, for some people that works out best, and that's great if you live in the UK. But here in France, France doesn't acknowledge that you'd get a 25% tax-free, so a whole 100% of it would be subject to French income tax, and depending on your circumstances, social charges. So I think the best thing to do if you are planning on moving to France is to speak to somebody to just have a little chat beforehand and say, if this is how I want to take my pension, is that best advice because I'm coming to France in 3 months or 6 months? Because what might work for the UK doesn't necessarily work, and it'd be awful if you've taken your you had the option to take 25% all in one go while you're in the UK and you didn't take it, and then you're sort of penalised because you decide to move to France. So it's like everything, and I know we talk about it all the time. You know, preparation is really important because we can often save you quite a bit of tax, and make sure that you get things right first time.
That's exactly what I was just thinking myself. It just highlights the importance of, thinking about these things before you move, because it can make a considerable difference to your finances. Okay, let's move on to a mortgages question for Sharon. What are the benefits of using a French mortgage, and is a cash purchase better? I mean, I know you work with French mortgages, so presumably you'd say use a mortgage, but what are your thoughts on that?
Well, yes, I would say use a mortgage, of course. However, there are some real benefits, and I will try and explain them. First of all, it's leverage. Using your savings to purchase a French property means that you don't have those savings anymore. I know that sounds really, really obvious, but you can't then just in the future, if your situation changes, if your plans change, you can't then take the money out of the French property, i.e. put a mortgage on the property at that time to get your money out and to buy something else. So once your money's gone into the property, you're not going to be able to get it out. In the UK, in the US, you can do equity release, home equity lines of credit. We don't have that option for non-residents in France. And even for French fiscal residents, sometimes it's possible to release the equity, but it's very, very expensive. So buying a property, even if you have the cash to buy it, using a French mortgage, your rates are going to be between 3.5, 3.6 and 4.4% at the moment. You're generally able to get a better return on your investment if you keep your savings. So that's one thing. So another thing is succession planning, inheritance, what's going to happen in the future when you pass away. The majority of French mortgages will require that you have life insurance. Maybe you have visited a French property which is owned by a zillion children, like the whole family, or the nieces and the nephews, and it's the whole family line, 10, 13, 15 people own the property sometimes. How does that happen? It's because people pass down the property, and when you have children, for example, and you pass away, I'm not going to go into too much detail on what happens in inheritance, because that's not my domain, but I'm just going to talk about what happens with mortgage insurance, which the French lenders require that you have. If you are two people on the mortgage and you are both insured for the mortgage for 100% for death, when the first person passes away, the mortgage is paid off entirely, and therefore your children, or whoever the people who are going to inherit from you, inherit a property which is unencumbered. So it means your savings have stayed in the bank, you're leaving them a property, and you've been able to enjoy that property whilst you were alive and now continue to enjoy it. I know it sounds really, really sorted, but it's actually really important, and people don't understand that it's part of inheritance planning as well to take a mortgage with the life insurance. So they're the main reasons for me, other than obviously just trying to sell our services as mortgage brokers. They have a real impact on your financial planning and strategy. So I think, Amanda, you would agree. Do you have anything to add from a financial perspective?
Yeah, I think that people particularly like to feel that they've got their mortgage free. It's something, I know as Brits we go, oh, we're mortgage free, but actually mortgage free isn't always the best way to be in France. It is a completely different beast, isn't it?
Yep, and our interest rates are fixed for duration as well. So if you're on a capital repayment mortgage and you're on a, say, 4% fixed, that's going to be fixed for the 20-year duration of your mortgage. So you don't have to go through the hassle of changing mortgage providers every couple of years because your low rate, fixed rate deal has come to an end. So mortgages in France are more about security and financial planning and making the most of leverage.
And as you said, Sharon, you have your savings, you can use those for other purposes, but also there's a good chance you can put your savings into other investments that pay a better rate than the low mortgage rates that you can get in France, which often come as a surprise to British and other overseas people who are used to higher rates.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Our interest rates are a lot lower. our mortgages tend to be capital repayments, and compared to what people can get in investments in their home countries, it makes more financial sense to take a French mortgage. I'm not saying it's an easy process. France is a very bureaucratic country. But one thing you can do if you do want to purchase and put yourself in a good position to purchase as a cash buyer is purchase as a cash buyer and do a post-finance mortgage in the 6 months after buying. That's something that's completely possible, and it gives you all of the advantages of being a cash buyer in terms of your negotiations, making your case stronger with the vendor, and putting you in the best possible position with estate agents and notaries. But you can then leverage, but it has to be done in 6 months following the purchase.
Oh, that's interesting. So that's like an alternative to equity release in a way.
It is, except
Different,
it's
but
in exactly the same conditions as a normal mortgage. You still get the low rate, and it's still a French property loan, as opposed to what we call a prêt hypothécaire. So you pay the lower taxes on the registration legal charge, and you pay a lower interest rate.
okay, thanks, Sharon. Very interesting. So let's move on to a healthcare question for Helen. Win-Win Tan in the USA says, as a 65-year-old healthy single woman, what health insurance would you recommend? And I presume she means, she or he, sorry, apologies to Win-Win. I presume they mean to live permanently in France.
Quite a broad question, but I suppose it helps lead into like the kind of different situations that people do have when they move across. So, you know, we touched earlier on the insurance you need if you're applying for a visitor visa. So you have to have that in place, even to get your visa, and you will need to keep that in place until you register for French social security. It's a legal requirement of residents in France to have some kind of health insurance in place. I think that's important to say. Whether you register, I mean, most people will register for French social security and will have a social security number, but you have a legal obligation to have some kind of health insurance in place. What type of insurance you have then kind of probably really depends. Before you have a social security number, I think even if you're in good health and you're coming from the US, then the day-to-day costs of routine healthcare are probably going to seem relatively trivial, to be honest. It is quite low. But I would say that I would advise everybody to have something in place in case something more serious happens, because costs can add up quite quickly if you're admitted to hospital and something happens. And, you know, I've been doing this for 8 years now with health insurance, and I have seen some situations, and I've seen people admitted for emergencies, and bills can add up, even in France, to tens of thousands of euros. So I think that's, you know, it's worth knowing. It's probably not like bankruptcy level health costs, but, you know, it's not something you want to be thinking about. So you can get cover for hospital only and emergencies, but just, you know, speak to somebody and have that conversation about what your priorities are, where are you going to be living, which kind of hospitals are you going to be using, you know, what concerns, what might happen, and just like have a look and put something in place. So, you know, until you can register for the French system, you know, at least bare minimum, I would say have something for accidents and emergencies. And then when you are in the French system, you can have the top-up insurance, which, you know, I'm sure we've talked about in other webinars in a lot more detail than Mutual. But you can, if you don't really want to have something very, very comprehensive, fine. But I would definitely recommend people consider at least a hospital plan, just to protect you against those kind of costs for something big happening, in my opinion.
Absolutely, better safe than sorry, I think. Okay, so a currency question for Harry now. Our offer on a property in Brittany has been accepted. What happens next in terms of currency exchange?
Okay, well, first of all, congratulations. It's a great situation to be in now that you've found the property. Very exciting times ahead. And on top of that, Brittany is a beautiful part of France. So I've been lucky enough to go there for work 4 or 5 times now, but I've always really enjoyed being there. So what happens next in terms of the currency? Well, you need to start thinking about getting organised to transfer the deposit if the offer's just been accepted. So of course I would encourage you to get in contact with us after this webinar, and it's a great way to actually test run our service. By just transferring the deposit, you'll be speaking to someone, you'll see, you know, it's the same process as when you're transferring for the full balance, but with smaller amounts. It's a nice way to test it. Once you've done the deposit, you'll be in a position where you'll start the conversation with your trader about the options that will become available to you. And this could be, for instance, a forward contract. Now, what do I mean by forward contract? Well, sterling has been increasing in strength now since early December. So given that piece of information, and given that we're now back in the 115s, you might want to lock in the rate today so that you know exactly how much this property is going to be costing you in pounds when the time comes to transfer the money. We'll just keep 10%, but you don't need to have your money available to transfer. It's just before the transfer goes to the notaire's office. Why is this interesting? Because you're removing the risk of sterling then crashing down over the coming months and this property costing you much more than you'd anticipated. So it's an option that especially people who are a bit tight on budget already might want to consider, because it just removes that risk and removes the deal falling through. If you like a little bit more risk, you might want to speak to your trader about, first of all, is there any scope of sterling to continue gaining in strength? And if it is, and you might want to risk it a little bit to save you some money, you can target a specific rate in the market, and you can place what's called a limit order. This only triggers once the market reaches that desired level. And lots of clients decide to combine this with a stop loss, so there's a level above, a level below. If the market improves, great, but if it goes down, then you know that the property's going to still be affordable because the currency will just automatically convert. And once you've purchased the euros, you can keep them with us in a client wallet, and the trader will be in touch with you a few days before completion just to make sure that the money's been transferred on time and there's no hiccups, because signing that final act can be a stressful time. So, you know, we'll be there to help you make sure everything's done on time.
Lovely, thanks, Harry. So we've got 10 minutes or so left in the webinar. Let's see if we can get a question in for each of our panelists before the end. So have to be fairly quick answers, I think. So Lisa, a question for you, a property one. What research can we do before we start viewing properties?
Well, obviously we try to be as transparent as possible on our website with lots of information, and we'll provide extra photos, etc. So clearly people can look at the actual properties, but research on your own budget and your financial situation so that your ducks are in a row as to how much you can afford to spend. As Harry said, checking out the exchange rate, speak to Sharon about mortgages if that's the option. How are you going to pay for the property? What on costs might there be for renovation or something you want to do to it? So absolutely researching what your budget needs to be. Then thinking about areas, because obviously France is a very, very big and geographically diverse, weather diverse country. So what has attracted you to want to go there? What do you already have an idea of the region? But drilling down into that rather than sort of being too vague, because obviously it's so big. Getting to know an agent and being really willing to talk to them and exchange with them, because so much more information can be passed on when people will actually speak. You know, prepare your questions for them. If you think you are going to buy something to renovate, you know, how much is that going to cost you? Because renovation costs have risen over the past few years. Looking about transport links, you know, how are you going to get to the property? Do you need to travel regularly? Are people going to come and visit you? So researching the transport options and if that's important to you. So all of those kinds of things are possibly the leading things that you should consider. But getting to know an agent and finding that you've established a rapport with an agent is really, really useful, because they're your person on the ground. And as I said at the top of the session, you know, you're working with them. You know, they're not just trying to sell you something, they're trying to help you find something. And, you know, for people relocating, it's not just a property, it's a lifestyle or somewhere they're going to spend lots of holidays. So, you know, it's much more of a personal connection that you need to establish with somebody. Okay.
Thanks, Lisa. One for Tracy now. Irene Blackhall in the UK says, what do we need to register for within 90 days of arriving in France with our 1-year visa?
Okay, excellent, Irene. Yes. So, you know, we talk about the planning before you come to France. So there's a lot of planning you're going to work on before you come to France. But then, of course, you've got your visa, and then it's once you're in France. So what is the next step? So, you know, once you get into France, one of the very first things you need to do is validate your visa. So there's an online process to validate that visa. And it's very important because that triggers the immigration system. So behind the scenes of the whole system that happens, whether you're on a visitor's visa or a business visa, there is a process to go through the validation. It costs €200 for a visitor's visa, €225 for a business visa, and so on. So that process is online. It triggers the immigration, so they will call you in to the OFI, which is the immigration office, and you'll go in, you'll have an appointment depending which visa you'll have, of course. They will stamp your visa in your passport, and then if it's a visitor's visa, you're ready to rock and roll. If it's a business visa, of course, there's the contract of integration and all of that to go through. So it's a slightly different process after validation. So that's the very first thing I would say. Obviously, getting a bank account, so getting support with bank account, and you know, I think you could definitely speak with Helen, who's here today, about bank accounts. So getting your bank account if you haven't already done that. The next thing I would say, and within the first 2 to 3 months, is getting your healthcare affiliation, because of course you've come into France with your visa and your private healthcare insurance, thanks to Helen and her team. But then, of course, once you're in France, the next step is going to be affiliating with the French healthcare system, because, of course, while you've got the visa insurance to help you for the first year for accident emergency, you will then need to get into the healthcare system, so that when you get to the renewal stage later on in the year, you have the healthcare and the social security in place. So that usually happens depending whether you're arriving with an S1 or even if you aren't, certainly the first 3 months, because you have to prove you're living in France for 3 months, but we start the process about month 2 because it takes quite a while. So those are the first kind of 3 things I would think of that you do within the first 3 months of moving to France. Then, of course, you could go into driving licenses, you know, sorting out your tax and things like that. So, sorry, mate, I'm trying to keep it quick. Hope that helps you, Irene.
Thanks, Tracy. So, one for Amanda. What assets are included for wealth tax in France?
Okay, so I'm going to do this really, really quickly. It's really easy. At the moment, it's just property. So just at the moment, bricks and mortar, but that does include your main residence, and you get a 30% discount off that. Any second homes, any rental properties, or any land. And for the first 5 years, okay, of living in France, it's only your French, any properties in France, okay? And this is going, I've just remembered going back to you, Sharon, this is where mortgages come in, okay? Because if you have a mortgage debt on your French property, then the debt is taken off, so that can reduce your wealth tax. So again, you can end up having your dream house for maybe 1.5 million that Lisa's arranged for you, and Sharon's done the mortgage, and then you've got a debt on it, and then you go, okay, well, I'll put that money, I'll do some investments. And then at the end of the period where you've paid your mortgage off, you've got your property, and then you've got all of your lovely cash as well. So it's like a win-win. And just quickly, it's 1.3 million euros, and then it's on a progressive rate. But there's lots of things that you can do, again, before you buy your property, to chat with you know, Sharon and all of the team to get you to be a bit smarter. So
that's great. Yes, that's a very good point. Another good reason to have a mortgage, that, you know, you can offset it for your wealth tax. So moving on to another mortgage question for Sharon. I'm self-employed. What will I need to provide in terms of proof of income for my mortgage application?
As a self-employed person, banks will require to see that that your income is sustainable and is oh, I'm sorry, I can't think of the word in English, but regular. So it doesn't kind of just dwindle off, and they will have to see 3 years worth of tax returns. So they will be able to see if you're self-employed as a sole trader, for example, it will be your net taxable income, so not your turnover, but your net taxable income after all of your expenses, generally averaged out over the last 3 years. It does depend on your age, and also if you've had spikes in your activity, maybe they will just remove 1 year and go over 2 years, or maybe when we had COVID recently, so lots of people's income changed, so we went back over maybe 5 years for some people. If you own a business, they will look at your income as in on your tax returns, generally from dividends, if you have dividends, and salaried income. However, there is a bit of an issue in France at the moment, is that dividends are considered hybrid capital mobilier, and therefore under the HSF regulations, they aren't necessarily considered as income from a mortgage perspective. So we have to be careful which banks look at your mortgage, again, but we would always be looking back over a 3-year period, because French banks have to show that they have checked your income and respect government criteria in terms of lending, which is why it's very important that the mortgage is affordable. So I will stop there, but if you're self-employed, do get in contact. It is more complicated.
Thanks, Sharon. We've got an insurance question for Helen. I'm not sure how you'll be able to answer this in a short amount of time, but if you could give the bullet points. How does house insurance work in France?
Now, I've been using my time to think about how to fire this out in bullet points, to be fair. The cost of your house insurance is fundamentally going to depend on the postcode where you buy and the number of rooms, the number of habitable rooms, so living rooms, bedrooms, such and such. The more rooms you have in the house, the more expensive your insurance will be. Like, that's kind of hands down how it works. French insurance is multi-risk, not all risk. So you're going to be insured for specific risks, not things like accidental damage. And a basic insurance, if you buy a basic insurance online, it is going to be basic, and it is only going to cover kind of very basic things. I'm sure there's a better word than that, but I'll come back to that. But you know, if you need, there's a lot of optional cover, including with us when we look at it. Theft and vandalism in the home is an option to show you how much the options can affect things. If you want to make sure everything is well covered, you really need to go through each detail and each option that is available and make sure that you understand what you're covered for, because the last thing you need is a massive storm, it knocks down all your trees and you're not covered to get them moved.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. Well done, Helen. That was really good for a short period of time. And one final question for Harry. Do we need a bank account to make a currency transfer to France?
Okay, so I'll be very quick, but the super short answer is no. When you're purchasing the property, you're needing to move money into the notaire's bank account, which is the solicitor in France. This doesn't necessarily need to come from a French bank. It can be sent straight from the UK. We saw a little bit earlier why that was not the preferable option. But basically, if you go through someone like us, we're going to provide you with an e-wallet. It's virtual. You can use it to stock your euros. You can use it to manage your finances. It can be topped up, and you can log on to make payments. When you do decide to make the payment to the notaire's bank account, we're going to make sure it comes straight from our euro account in France, just to make sure there's minimal disruption. They prefer it coming from France rather than internationally because there's less paperwork to do. So we've aligned ourselves and we've got all set up in France to make sure it's as easy as possible, really.
That's great. That sounds nice and straightforward. So that brings us to the end of today's webinar. The next one will be on the 13th of May. You'll receive details about that and how to register by email. And you'll also receive a recording of today's webinar, which is really handy if you want to listen to any bits again or if you missed anything. So I'm sorry we didn't get around to answering all your questions, but all our panelists' details are here on the screen. They'll be delighted to help you with any further queries. So before we leave, I'll just hand over to our panelists to say their goodbyes. So Lisa.
Thank you, Karen. Yes, farewell, everybody. And hopefully you could now move ahead with your French project. And if you have any questions about the contract process that we touched on, don't hesitate to email. I'll be happy to answer.
Fantastic. And Tracy?
So great answering the questions this evening. And as already said, we're all here to help you transition to France. You've got all the experts here, so reach out to us. Our job is really to help you on, you know, all of the paperwork side of things. So if you have a project and you're serious about moving to France, we're all here to help you, so do reach out.
Thank you, Sharon.
Yeah, thanks for hosting, Karen. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. There were some great questions. I actually really find it beneficial also to hear everybody else's answers, because we are all experts in our fields. And quite often I don't get to hear people talking about tax or the property purchase process or the visas. So I think having everybody together, I hope, has given you all the information you need and some insight into what it's like to buy in France. So thank you for tuning in, and don't hesitate to get in touch if you want any mortgage information, as well as contacting anybody else for more information in their field.
Thanks, Sharon. And Helen?
Thanks for having me today, and I hope it's been useful. I just say to people, your health, moving to another country is something that I think that can be worrying and is important. Don't let that be the reason you don't move. I'm fairly sure there's not many situations I haven't seen or like considered over the years. Get in touch, have a chat. I'm sure there's a solution there for everyone.
Fantastic. And Amanda?
I would only say thank you very much for having me. Speak to the team. We've got years and years of knowledge, and we've all come across lots and lots of different things. Preparation, that's all you need to think of, is no question is too silly, and just get your prep in first.
Lovely. Thanks, Amanda. And Harry?
Thanks so much, Karen, for hosting. Thanks to the other panelists for sharing your expertise. In the world we live in today, I think it's pretty clear that it can be all a bit crazy, and that's always reflected in the exchange rates. So don't get caught out. Speak to us. All of our details are on the screen now, so just send us an email and we'll be more than happy to see if we can assist.
Fantastic. So once again, thank you for joining us. We hope to see you next time too. Bye now.
Bye.
Bye-bye.